Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about negotiating the best price for a small business when you are trying to buy one. Stay tuned.
I'm David C. Barnett, and you're tuned in to Small Business and Deal Making, the podcast, YouTube channel, and blog where I talk about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium sized businesses while controlling risk. So, if you're looking to take control of your future through buying a business one day, or if you already own a business and you're looking to grow or exit, you've come to the right place. I talk about interesting things, I talk to interesting people, and I answer your questions every week right here. So be sure to hit like and be sure to hit subscribe, and let's get to it. Are you thinking of growing your business or beginning a journey into entrepreneurship? Take a shortcut to success by buying an existing and profitable business the right way. Visit businessbuyeradvantage.com and learn more about my online training, group coaching, and consulting services designed to help you win.
All right, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about negotiating the best price when trying to buy a business. So, how do you do that? Well, the very first thing that I would recommend that you do is you define what the term best means to you. I've got a couple of different examples here. So for some people, the best price is the lowest price, right? And for some people, the best price is the most affordable price vis-a-vis the cash flow. And for some people, the best price is the one that assures to the best degree possible that you will be successful as the buyer. And not all of these things are the same, right? They're all very different. What what it starts with, like any negotiation, is just having an understanding of what it is that you need uh, from the business and the seller, and those are two different things, right? So, the business is a collection of assets and it's a system, and maybe there's some employees and things. And the seller is an individual that today, before you buy the business, may be playing an integral role in having that business function. They may be directing that business. They might be the owner, the manager, etc., in the business. They may be more removed, right? And so you've heard a lot of conversations that I've had here on this channel talking about how people can improve the value of their business by removing themselves from day-to-day operation. Because as a buyer, if you saw a business where the owner was not there every day, it would actually make you feel more comfortable that if you bought the business, it would be more easy. It would be easier for you to continue its operation because the current owner isn't there anyway, right? And so, what you need from the business and what you need from the individual who is the seller could be very different things. And we need to have an understanding of what those things are. The people who need the least amount from the business seller, of course, would be people that are already experts in the operation of that kind of business. I made a video back in 2023 called Bizowner Advantages in Buying Small Businesses, where I talked about how if you already are in a given industry, that you have an distinct advantage in buying other businesses in that same industry. There's a fellow who's in the group coaching program who's bought several medical transportation businesses, for example. And he has a whole team now with middle management and leaders, et cetera, in that are experts in that industry. And so they can often look at businesses that are for sale and they legitimately know how to run those businesses maybe better than the current owner. And so when they look at a business, for example, they're not really that concerned about what they need to get from the seller because they know that once they get their hands on the assets, and they're probably going to tear everything apart and put in new processes and procedures, et cetera, and they may even improve the business with their own systems. And so that negotiation and what that buyer thinks is the best price is going to be very different from someone who not only is trying to buy the business but also trying to negotiate a cooperative arrangement with the seller and have that seller stick around and help with transition and training over the long haul, right? And so it's going to be a little bit different. The there you know I'm filming this in the spring of 2025, and there's all kinds of stuff going on about negotiation online, in particular because of what's happening with politics in the world and negotiations between countries and things like that. And there's a guy with a very big Twitter channel feed who has put out this tweet, and I won't name him because I don't really want anybody to go look at his stuff. But he says that there's four things that you need to make a deal: decision makers at the table, number one; number two, willingness and desire; number three, urgency; and number four, leverage. And so I'd like to just like highlight some of these things because this is the kind of thing that gets out there and people talk about it and people will look at a tweet like this and they won't stop and examine what uh how it may not apply to another person's situation. So for example, decision makers at the table. Well, obviously, if you're going to have a deal of any kind, you need to be dealing between the two decision makers. So, as the buyer of the business, you need to have direct access to the seller. I have spoken to many people over the course of time who've been very frustrated, for example, by brokers who try to insulate sellers away from buyers. It's absolutely ridiculous. So you need to be able to communicate with the other party. That's number one. But I don't think you should negotiate for a business face to face. Negotiations for something like a business should be done on paper in writing so that people can spend time reflecting on things. Which brings me to number two, willingness and desire on this list. Presumably, someone who puts their business out there for sale wants to sell it. And somebody who's out there looking to buy a business wants to buy it. So those elements are there. Number three, urgency. Urgency very rarely is it a part of a business purchase and sale negotiation. Why do I say that? Um, because the sellers, if the business is a good and profitable business, they always know that if they just don't do a deal, they continue to enjoy the profitable cash flow of the business. And so that tones down urgency tremendously. If of the five reasons people want to sell a small business, burnout, boredom, and fatigue, divorce, poor health, the need to relocate, and retirement, I often say that retirement creates the least amount of motivation because people know that if they just stay with the business for another few years, they're going to get the same amount of money out of the business as they would from selling it. Eventually, they might reach a point where they're so desperate to be able to take advantage of the time that they have remaining in their life that they might feel a little more motivated. But I've often found that, sellers that are 65 years old that are in good health, they might put their business up for sale, but they're not terribly motivated, right? So that urgency thing may or may not be there. Obviously, if you can find a highly motivated seller because they, are ill, for example, or they need to do something else in their life and the business is preventing them, then that can play to your advantage as a buyer. And then the number four thing on this list is leverage. Um, you know, and when I think of leverage, you know, it's like you have to do this or else. To me, that's not really an aspect that helps you make a deal. It might be something that helps you bully someone, you get someone to do something they may not want to do because they feel like they don't have a choice. But in the case of buying a business, the only really real leverage that a buyer could ever bring to bear on a seller would be simply a willingness to not do a deal. Just sticking to your position and not being willing to cross a line that doesn't make sense to you and being willing to say, if I can't make a deal under these terms that make sense for me, I'm just not going to do a deal. Right. And I've had to counsel a lot of people over the course of years to just say, hey, don't do something that doesn't work. You've got to make an arrangement that works for you. So, you know, you have to understand what you need out of the seller and out of the business. And those are two different things. You also have to figure out what the seller exactly wants. And that could be a number of things. And we often make assumptions about this, and we can make assumptions that aren't exactly true or aren't exactly correct. And this is one of the big reasons why you need access to the seller if you're going to negotiate one of these deals is you need to actually talk to the person and ask them what they want out of the deal or what's important to them or what their plans are after retirement because it can really inform how you craft your offer or offers and whether or not those things are going to resonate with the seller, right? And so, in order, if you go out there and you do a search for negotiating the best business purchase deal, or you look at any of my other content, you're probably going to think about sort of the tactics, right? Well, I need to have a lot of seller financing. I need to have conditions of offset. I need to have maybe an earnout if the business isn't quite performing as well as the seller believes it could one day, right? But how are you going to get someone to actually accept those terms? Well, you have to lay a lot of foundations before someone is going to be able to perceive you as being qualified or trustworthy in order for them to accept those kinds of terms from you. So I've got a live stream guest coming up here soon who's a person who just sold their business. And they're going to come on and they're going to talk about the number of people that contacted them from their business for sale listing who, within the first communication, started asking questions about whether this person was willing to sell or finance the business 100%. It's absolutely outrageous. And it's going to be a fun video, a fun interview, I'm sure. But think about that for a minute, right? To approach a seller and immediately identify yourself as a person who's broke, has no money, and the only way you can do this deal is if you can creatively get the business to pay for itself. It's going to be so easy for that seller to dismiss you, right? And so if you want to communicate an offer that might make sense for you, and I talk about this all the time, where you're like, oh, you got a customer concentration issue, so we're going to have to do this special kind of terms and conditions on a seller note, or I'm going to have to apply an earnout, or maybe we're going to treat this with a royalty, like all these sort of fancy, creative, innovative ways to set up a deal. It all begins with the seller actually thinking that you're a person that can run the business. And if they don't have that opinion of you, they're not going to accept any of that kind of nonsense, right? And so you need to sell yourself as a qualified new owner. And what is that going to take? Right? It's going to take communication. It's going to take a willingness to be able to demonstrate your track record of success in the working world or the business world, etc. Right? You're going to have to prove that you are qualified to be able to run this business so that they can in turn trust you. And in fact, it's more than just trust. When somebody is going to, for example, do a seller financing note or agree to a royalty or an earnout, they are in fact making an investment of value that they hold in that business. They're going to be investing part of that in you in your new endeavor, right? So I've made videos before about finding private investors. In fact, there's a whole module in Business Buyer Advantage that was just added at the end of 2024, all about attracting private investors. And so to approach somebody to negotiate for the purchase of their business and go from being someone who is going to buy something from them. And when you think of a transaction, normally you think, hey, I have something to sell. Someone's going to give me some money and I'm going to give them the thing. Right. So to go from the position of expecting people to offer you money for your thing of value to coming along and saying, not only do I want your thing of value, but I want you to invest in me and my acquisition of your thing of value. I mean, you're asking someone to go quite far, right? And so not only then do they have to determine whether they think that you're a good person and you're trustworthy and that you're capable, but also that your plan to take over and operate their thing is doable and worthy of their investment, right? So we're talking about a lot of ground to cover here, and it all comes down to relationship and building trust and building rapport. And on top of all that, you then have to figure out, do the numbers actually work? So now that we've talked about sort of all the bridges that have to be crossed with respect to the relationship, what I would say is if you need the participation of the seller, then probably haggling down to the lowest possible price is not the way to secure the unrelenting and devoted attention of the seller post transaction, right? Especially if you're going to pay all cash. And this would be an example of like a buyer who shoots themselves in the foot. And I have seen this. Like I have seen people make an offer on a business and negotiate hard, and then at the 11th hour before closing, they come up with all these other reasons why they should pay less for the business. And the seller is not happy, but the seller, if they are truly motivated, they don't have maybe time to go do another deal. And so the buyer actually takes advantage of the seller in this scenario and ends up nickeling down the price a little bit. And now the seller gets a lower amount of money. But because it wasn't structured with any kind of seller financing or royalties or whatever over time, the seller then can exact revenge for this devious deal making on the part of the buyer where they don't offer the level of support after the transaction that maybe they claim they would have earlier in the negotiation, right? And so I've seen buyers who are so focused on getting the lowest possible price that they end up putting themselves in a very precarious position. I would argue that that doesn't make sense at all. That you're trying to make a deal that both parties can live with so that you can end up with a great relationship after the transaction, and you can look to the seller to help support you and help guide you through how to manage the business and through any hiccups that might occur through the transition, and even years down the road to have a relationship with them where you can pick up the phone and talk to the person and just say, hey, this is going on in the business, did you face anything like that? Could you give me some advice? Is there something I should be thinking about or considering here when I'm making this decision? And that person will be happy to help you out, right? Because they will see that your ownership of the business now is a continuation of sort of their legacy and what they put into the business. And you can have those win win relationships, but it's not through trying to exercise leverage and take advantage of somebody who might be highly motivated. It's about actually understanding what both parties want and making an offer or offers that make sense. Speaking of offers, plural, it's one of the strategies I often recommend because if you make more than one offer, you can create more than one scenario that sort of shows what could be possible as far as a deal. And funny enough, there are some brokers that kind of push back against this concept, but a seller can't accept more than one offer at the same time. So there's no reason why it isn't safe or prudent to make more than one offer at the same time. Because the offer that they respond to can actually give you information about what they're thinking about the business, the market, or you as a potential operator. And that information is going to then help inform the second iteration of the offer because usually these things go back and forth several times. Um, you are going to want some degree of seller participation in the deal. So I mentioned earlier about things like royalties, earnouts, or seller financing. I think it's 100% necessary to have any of those things with one big exception. The big exception being that the business has no goodwill and you are an expert in operating it. So, what do I mean by no goodwill? I mean the price that you pay is equivalent or less than the value of the stuff in the business. So, if there's machinery, equipment, inventory, et cetera, that adds up to 400 grand and you're paying 400 grand, well, you're just getting the stuff you paid for. And if you already know how to run the business, then okay, then you're going to operate it. And so those kinds of scenarios are the only ones in which I think that it's safe to make any kind of offer that doesn't have some sort of seller participation. But like I said before, in order to get the seller to participate, they have to be convinced that you're qualified, right? And this is where a lot of people shoot themselves in the foot is they try to make these offers without having created the credibility in presenting who they are and what their background is and all that kind of stuff. Some other interesting concepts that I think are important here are payment timing and location. So there's been a couple of deals that I've worked on over the last 2 years where the buyer and seller have gotten some really great tax advice and taken certain things into consideration. So, one of the advantages, for example, of seller financing to a seller is that their accountant can create a capital reserve mechanism, which allows the deferral of taxes that might be due into the future when those payments are going to be received. And so sometimes deferring taxation can have advantages to it. Ultimately the taxes are going to be paid. But what if the scenario or situation of the seller changes such that the tax burdens on those monies are different over time? So I'll give you an example. Working with someone who was negotiating for the purchase of a business in California, California being a rather high tax jurisdiction. And the seller was selling the business so that they could then move to Texas, which is a lower tax jurisdiction. So, there's a couple of different ways you can pay a seller for a business. You can pay them for the stock or shares of the business. You can buy the assets of the business and from the seller's entity. And then, depending on how they're structured, what kind of corporate form they have, it's going to inform how their taxes are going to be paid, et cetera. But another way that you can often compensate someone is through, a consulting arrangement. So you can say, all right, I'm going to buy the business for this amount of money, but then I want to hire you to consult with me over a period of time. And so if this seller moves jurisdictions from a higher tax jurisdiction to a lower tax jurisdiction, then the tax burden on those payments, because it's, you know, pay for work being done, uh, the tax obligation will be lower if they move to a lower tax jurisdiction, right? So these are all things too that can play into sort of the deal making process, but you're not going to learn any of these details or be able to fit them into your puzzle unless you have that relationship and you're having those conversations and you understand what's going to happen with the seller and where they're headed, et cetera, and what their goals are. The other big thing is to clearly define the contingencies and representations. So I talk a lot about things like how we can manage customer concentration through a seller note or have offsets in the seller note for certain conditions like this. It's really important for you to demonstrate to the seller where you perceive the risks to be in the business that you're acquiring and what it means for you if some of those risks were to actually occur. A lot of sellers don't see their businesses the same way that buyers do. They because they live with these risks every day, they are comfortable with them, and they don't think things are going to happen the way you think things might happen. And if something really bad does happen, like losing a major customer for a business seller, and they've been in business for 30 years and have a robust balance sheet with very little debt, they're going to be able to better absorb that bad luck than you would be if you've just taken on a big debt to buy the business. And so, a lot of the times, when buyers and sellers are negotiating, um, buyers actually need to show this to sellers. So you actually have to show, like, here's what the cash flow looks like when I do this deal. Because I'm going to borrow money, I'm going to have to pay making note payments to you, to the bank, I'm going to have to take out a salary, etc. And so they can demonstrate here's what the business really looks like once I'm the owner. And here's what could happen to this cash flow if that major customer disappears, and you show the seller like this is the position that you'll be in and this is why you perceive the risk to be as deadly or dangerous as you do, so that when you make your sort of risk mitigation offer you can say that's why I need this in the deal, so that if this should occur this is what's going to happen. And here's what will happen is that the seller is either going to understand and realize the riskiness of your position, uh, or they're not going to care, right? And so if they don't care, what does that mean? Well, it means that either they think that they have many other options as far as buyers for the business. And if they think that they can sell the business to someone else who isn't going to see the same risks that you do and they're not going to care about those risks, then from the seller's point of view, why should they do this deal or give you some special terms or conditions that they don't have to give to other people, right? And they're absolutely correct if they are just focused on getting the highest price. But if they're not, if they really think that you're the best operator, then you've got an opportunity to show them why it's necessary for you to have these kinds of terms and conditions. The other thing that you always have to keep in mind on is just your gut. And so if something is going on in this relationship with the seller as you're negotiating through this deal and you just don't feel like things are sound or that you can trust them, my advice usually is to get out. Um, I think we're wired to know when there's danger around, and your gut could be telling you something, and it may not just be telling you that you're dealing with a dangerous person. It could simply be telling you that you're not the right person to do this deal or you're not the right person to make this acquisition. There can be 101 different things. But I've learned over the years from the number of people I've spoken to who've told me that they had a really bad feeling about things and they went ahead and did the deal anyway, and then things have gone badly. Um, Particularly when you're dealing with people, it's important to make sure that you're dealing with people that have integrity, that are trustworthy. And I've given this advice to some people, and I'm really leaning on the idea that this should probably be a part of a lot of people's um, process. Is you may even want to spend some time checking out the person that you're dealing with. You know, even to do some snooping online, seeing what kind of stuff that they put on social media, or who they're associated with, what they may have done in their past, etc. Um, because these are life changing deals that people are working on, and sometimes the best outcome or negotiating the best price for a deal is to uncover information or insights that show you that you maybe shouldn't be doing the deal at all. Anyway, um, sorry to bring it around to such a dour note today. The other key points I wanted to bring up here in today's conversation about the best price is to make sure that from the very beginning, you have an understanding of working capital requirements in the business and what you need to have included in the business, and make sure that is identified at the outset and part of any offer. You don't want to surprise people who may believe that they're going to be getting the money that you offer them for the business, plus they get to keep the cash, receivables, et cetera, in the business already. You want to make sure it's clear from the outset what has to be a part of the business. And you also have to make it clear what kind of transition and training program that you're expecting from them, and make sure that you have a way of holding them to it. And this again would be tied to those conditions, the earnouts, the seller notes, et cetera, and the contingencies tied to those things. Anyway, if you're serious about buying a business, you should head over to businessbuyeradvantage.com. You can learn there about my online training course, my group coaching program, where we talk about all of this stuff all the time. Basically, the conversations over there are all about what happened in my meeting with the seller, what happened in my meeting with the banker, what the expert I hired to look at the machinery said, what this person I hired to help me with this said. And you get a front row seat on all kinds of other people's deals. It's You also have access to recordings of our past meetings going all the way back to 2018. So the group coaching program is a huge advantage for people that are serious about going out there and making a deal. And for people that have found something that they just want help with analyzing, we also have a series of consulting offers that we do where we will help look at it. We will look at a business for you and sort of show you what we think the business is worth, what we think are some reasonable first offers, and what we think are red flags associated with that particular business. And all of that information is over at businessbuyeradvantage.com. Just go from the top down to the bottom through the page. There's a series of videos that explain all of these different things as you go. And with that, I want to say thank you very much. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.
So, how can you learn more about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium sized businesses? Easy. Go over to my blog site, davidcbarnett.com, where you can learn more about me and how I work with my clients. You can learn more about my books and courses that I prepared for you. You can find out how to subscribe to my email list, the YouTube playlists, and more. There's literally hundreds of hours of content there, all for free, and I'd love for you to be my guest. Special thanks go to Mark Willis at Lake Growth Financial, today's video sponsor. Mark helps people better manage their personal and business finances through the Bank on Yourself insurance strategy. This is something I've done personally, and I've seen others use it successfully for years. Go to newbankingsolution.com to find all the interviews I've done with Mark and learn more about the advantages of these programs. While there, sign up for a free consultation to learn what this solution might look like for you.